Welcome back. Hip hop and martial arts movie fan Mark Shaver is back.
What's up?
A big giant dream. Not as big a dream as what Tupac, our subject, had. But
That's true.
I got
the man had dreams, and I guess you could say to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know what all of his dreams were, but I'm sure in his short life he definitely accomplished some of his dreams. That would be my assumption.
I would think that he not only felt the weight of being a giant icon back in his day, but also he couldn't predict it, but he felt very blessed at the same time. So
it's hard to say. I mean, sometimes you wondered, like, did he feel like a mix of like a blessing and a curse, sort of, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, if you think about it, like a lot of his music dealt with, like death and stuff. And I mean, a lot of people claim that he like predicted his untimely demise, which, that can be argued either way, I'm sure. But you got to wonder. I mean, I think if he hadn't chosen that path, you got to wonder, I mean, he would probably still be alive today. But that's a unique circumstance. That's not to say that would have affected everybody the same way. I mean, his situation was unique in its own way, just as anybody else. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
The whole incident at the MGM, and Suge Knight in his ear, and this and
How
that.
he was from the East Coast, but as a rapper, he represented the West Coast because he felt like the East had betrayed him during his jail time.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole history with, I know he went to drama school in Baltimore and
was a backup dancer for Digital Underground.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's got a lot of history in his short life. I mean, it's very interesting, especially that. I don't know. It's like once he hit death row, it's like, I mean, his career kind of went into overdrive.
He was like their property, and at the same time, like he was just wild and ambitious. And just hearing the stories that John Singleton told about how he almost got, the part of Doughboy and Boys in the Hood. And
yeah, and then he was
the dude just storms out of his audition. You're like, whoa, hey.
Menace to society as well.
Yeah, the Hughes were like, "Who is this fool? What's he doing? Oh man, he's intimidating, but he's not going to be on our movie set."
Yeah, I guess he punched one of them or something.
Kind of, and
something like that. I don't remember the
it's
whole
just so
story.
wild because he'd already been in the movie Juice, so it's like he didn't want to be typecast, but it totally would have typecast him. But at the same time, it's just so wild how Juice was, it did okay business. It was a cult movie, but it wasn't a big, giant movie. And yet,
yeah,
it's just so wild how Boys that had come before and Menace came after, and those were bigger. And this one was just caught in the middle, and it just stinks because it is a pretty brilliant psycho performance he delivers in that. I would hear parts of music like California Dreamin' on the radio, but I was definitely way more familiar with his work as a film star in a way. Like I knew he was a rapper, but I just, his lyrics were so explicit. I didn't hear him on the radio all that much.
Yeah. I mean, I first became familiar with him in the early 90s because my sister was a huge fan of rap at that time. I mean, she got me into it when I was pretty young. Of course, it was predominantly the stuff on TV, that would have been radio.
He was a multi-generation guy. Just about everybody knew him. I couldn't go into any junior high, even in the 2000s, that didn't have if it wasn't a photo of a movie character like Scarface, I was definitely always going to see Tupac and a religious verse, on that same shirt. And it's like, yeah, he's basically, he literally is a rap god,
Well, I mean, he even before he passed away, he was already just like, I don't think he's a case of somebody who you know, who wouldn't have had the fame had he not passed early, because he already had it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember. I mean, I was only probably 8 years old when I first like saw some of his music videos. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. And this
the
is
one I
about the
remember the
time.
most is "Holler If You Hear Me."
Holly, if you hear me.
From
Yeah.
that age, you know. But I also remember the video for "Keep Your Head Up."
Yeah. I
And
definitely would
then,
hear those at a nightclub or in some radio remix with some other popular pop and electronic music. And yeah, uh, and I hate to get all conspiratorial, but much like the various stuff about JFK, he in a way was kind of my hip hop JFK. I totally was buying into a lot of this stuff where people were like, yeah, he staged his death and he's in witness protection in Australia or something.
Cuba or wherever. Yeah, yeah.
Because he just has so much music just like released, you know, post death, and you're just like, how did he get this much in the can? You know,
Well, I think he had that strong drive, that strong work ethic. Like, I mean, from what I gathered, like, I mean, especially once. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't beforehand, but it sounds like really once he signed with Suge Knight, it sounds like he was just always at the studio, like, and just always like writing. I don't know how quickly he came up with All Eyes on Me, but for such a
mm-hmm.
classic album, I think he came up with all the tracks pretty quick. And that's the first album I actually, as a by then I would have been in middle school, but
Oh, nice.
but that's his first album that I actually was able to sit down and listen to the full album front to back. You know, that was after he had passed. That would have been in probably like early '99. I want to say is when my sister had the cassette tape, and uh, you know, I borrowed it from her one day, and just, you know, first I familiarized myself with like book one, as they called it. You know, I mean, it was
Right.
like a double album, so, you know, they had the cassette. I'm trying to remember how I think the
Because we
cassette, it
had
was two.
Dr. Dre and, you know, NWA and, you know, Body Count were coming out, and those guys were just notorious for not only just also being big on the acting scene, but having their newest tracks in their movies. So, you know, it's like Tupac, of course, is following suit. He's doing all the talk show appearances. He's, like you say, he's refurbishing what a rap album should look like, let alone what any kind of music album should look like. And then he's, yeah, having his new singles play in some of his new movies. And, you know, 97 was just such a huge year. You know, you got Gang Related and Gridlock in the same year. He'd done Bullet before, but I don't think it did as much business despite Mickey Rourke and then unknown Adrian Brody being in it. But uh, you'd be surprised. As many people as I know who know Tupac, I occasionally will come across people who haven't seen some of his movies. Like they've seen Above the Rim and Juice, but they haven't seen Gang Related.
Yeah, Above the Rim. If I had to pick a favorite, and it's actually been quite a while since I've probably watched any of them. I think the last time I watched one of his films was Poetic Justice, but
That's true. Yeah, that was as close as he got with Singleton. Singleton hired him back. He was just like, okay, you're not going to be in this movie, but you can be in this movie. You know?
Gang Related was pretty good. I think Above the Rim might be my favorite.
It definitely has the best use of his soundtrack while, like you say, having him be part of more of an ensemble. Because like Gang Related, you know, he kind of stills every scene, but even when he's not on screen, while, you know, Above the Rim, he's being part of, you know, Marlon Wayans and Dwayne Martin, and having to, like you say, he's being a bit of an opposition, but he's also kind of an anti-hero in that one versus Juice, where, you know, he's just straight up the antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I don't think, I'm trying to think here. I think I've only watched his films maybe only one time a piece.
They're not on TV all that much. Like
I've
I would
seen all of
see,
them, but it's been a long time. But the only
yeah,
one I know I have Above the Rim on DVD. I think that's the only one I have a copy of.
it's commonly on VH1, but I'm with you. Like Juice, they used to show a lot in the 2000s on BET, and gang related would show on like regular channels like WB or UPN because it wasn't too hard to modify. But
I've got the soundtracks. They put out the gang related soundtrack on Death Row. They put out the
nice.
Gridlock soundtrack, and
I didn't think
obviously
about
Above
that.
the Rim. I was going to say that's like probably my favorite soundtrack of all time is Above the Rim.
It really serves the movie really well because
And what's interesting, this is really like crazy. Like when you think about it, the cassette version of that soundtrack had 3 bonus tracks that weren't on the CD.
I could believe it. It was very common before they had, iTunes, and they could sneak that in saying, never before remastered,
One of my all-time favorite Tupac songs was one of those tracks. It's called Pain. And they actually played that. I remember they played that in the film Above the Rim. So
Sweet.
that's just one of his all-time best tracks. Now, finally, they put that out on a CD with
like the best of, or
it was a Death Row compilation. It was called like 15 Years on Death Row. That was back in 2006. So,
oh wow,
long time ago now. But it was like a double, or I think a double disc. Kind of like a compilation, and it was mostly kind of greatest hits like California Love and this and that. But then they had a few more like lesser known tracks, like even Snoop had a song called G's Up, Hose Down that was only on the first pressings of his original album Doggy Style, and then I think due to like sample clearance rights, they had to take it off.
I could buy that. Yeah, it was a big common thing, and it seemed like much like fair use, its terminology was very loose until someone complained, and they would, face up to the pressure.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, Above the Rim. I mean, the soundtrack. If you look at the, because one of my classic memories, because I used to sit and watch music videos with my sister all the time, and my favorites, at least the ones that stood out to me the all-time most, would have been, a few of Dr. Dre's singles from The Chronic, like Nothing But a G Thing,
yes,
Dre Day, and Let Me Ride, and then Snoop songs, Gin and Juice, Who Am I, What's My Name, Ice Cube's classic track, It Was a Good Day,
mm-hmm.
and then Regulate, Warren G and Nate Dogg. And that video was, because that was a single on the Above the Rim soundtrack. So that music video had like clips of the film, kind of interspersed with the footage they shot of Warren G and Nate Dogg doing.
They were following the 80s trend of just, have movie clips interspersed with the film soundtrack, and
yeah,
the soundtrack had to be just as big as the movie. Like that was how you got your money back, especially if you were waiting for a home video release and TV airings. But yeah, it's just so wild because, like you say, this is like, here he is, an East Coast born man, West Coast rapper, and for clarification for others, is like, when you're thinking West Coast, you're thinking people like Exhibit, E40, The Game, even Crooked, and again, like you said, Snoop and Dre, what have you.
Yeah, Ice Cube, DJ Quick. I mean, the list goes on.
And Body Count was there too, I believe, right? That's why they collaborated.
Well, that was Ice-T's group, yeah, like the heavy metal group. I'm not overly familiar with where they're all from. Obviously, Ice-T is from L.A. Okay, I think they were from around there too.
Because I know he collaborated a few times with NWA before doing their feud.
So he did some work with. Actually, Ice-T was on Tupac's second album on a track with Ice Cube.
That's right. Oh my God. Yeah. So yeah, so here's the twist. So Ice-T is considered West Coast hip hop scene, despite his East Coast New York origin. So yeah, you're right.
Oh yeah, that's true. Ice-T was born in New Jersey.
That's why he's on Law and Order.
I forgot that he was born in New Jersey. Yeah, but he was repping L.A., South Central area, and then Tupac was kind of representing, like, he said he moved to Marin County, like the Bay Area.
Yeah.
But then he kind of switched later on to kind of repping L.A. once he joined Death Row.
And just so funny because, yeah, East Coast, that's where Biggie and Jay-Z are. And you get so much of that from the future feuds.
Yeah, it's interesting, I mean, when I was like a kid, I had no idea he was born in New York. We
just didn't think about it. It was kind of like hard rock versus metal. It was all just so discombobulating and just interspersed together to where he's like, yeah, I'm listening to Def Leppard as much as I am, Metallica. I don't care. It's all fucking cool. But there is a difference, much like, hip hop versus rap. Rap is supposed to be more poetic.
I mean, I definitely have to say I did prefer Death Row to Bad Boy. No disrespect. I mean, Biggie's albums, especially Ready to Die, was a classic. I mean, truly a great album. And I love East Coast hip hop too. If I had to pick, to me, the West Coast sounds more nostalgic because, like, that's what I first remember hearing. It was the early '90s. G-Funk was taking over. Death Row was taking over. So, I mean, that sound to me,
before we got used
to the most nostalgic.
Totally, before Houston and New Orleans kind of blew up for a bit.
Yeah. But we got hopefully that upcoming No Limit Records one in July.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Mr. Servon will be able to join us.
Totally.
That'll be cool because that New Orleans sound has got its own little thing, and like I was just thinking,
even jazz samples,
I was listening to one of his albums today while I was working, and I was just thinking, like, and they had their own little, beef, so to speak, with like Cash Money Records, and to me too. I mean, I gotta say, no disrespect, but I mean, I always preferred No Limit. Like Cash Money, I couldn't get into it.
It's whatever just really appeals, and this is years before we're using our Walkmans and what have you. Before everything was all on our Spotify and our phones, and we're working out.
And that's interesting because No Limit actually started in the Bay Area of California too, in Richmond. And Master P actually posted a photo one time within the last few years of him. I think he said he had opened up at one of Tupac's shows, and so
that's badass.
I don't believe they ever got any chance to work together. I mean, record tracks together. But
shame.
I remember some kid in high school claiming that Tupac had been considering signing with No Limit at one time, which chances are that's BS. You know what I mean? But
yeah, he was looking at forums before forums were becoming more and more unreliable, and just
there was a lot of rumors that stated that that Tupac was thinking of leaving Death Row and this and that. Right before he died, he was like trying to form like the Death Row East and have like East Coast artists. I don't know.
I do kind of vaguely recall that, where it's just like he was literally rising up, becoming a businessman, music producer almost.
What's interesting is he had like all the, a lot of that, which obviously stemmed from the whole Biggie beef, but everybody on the East Coast was taking Biggie's side, so they got drawn into the beef, like Mobb Deep and Nas and Jay-Z.
Just like sports, even if you hate your team, you stick with your man. You stick with your players.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, like you say, some beefs go too far. You'd always see, Eminem apologizing. You'd see freaking, Ja Rule get owned and he never came back because he didn't have a, reply. And so it's like you see all these other, what are considered top class of the genre, redefining it, in the 90s. And
Yeah.
we're going to talk DMX later. Is like, you really do feel a visual angle from hearing Tupac's lyrics. And I know, yes, just like it's cool to be a rock fan and instantly kind of a no-brainer to even talk about, say, Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, but there does come a time where you're just like, yeah, really, they're doing stuff that has never been recreated as great since. And it's like with Tupac, you're getting so many different diverse stories, upbringing, while mixing it in with the gangster rap, subgenre. But to be so well identified with the genre and the subgenre, is like that is still quite an achievement.
Yeah, and like you were talking about, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes, like you said, sometimes those things go too far.
You don't know how much of it is the manager is encouraging it versus,
Yeah, you got to step back and think. Why did Dr. Dre leave? Why did Snoop Dogg leave? I mean,
yeah,
I think Dr. Dre pretty much said he left because he didn't like the work atmosphere anymore.
They're not going to say they were afraid, but at the same time, they kind of knew he could overstep his balance, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you got to say maybe he didn't run the company the way he should have. I don't know.
Kind of like how all these producers, some of them, have been canceled, and some of them have been, just the right amount of creativity meets business, and some of them were, notorious, like business only, but lucked out with like free crowd pleasers, and then, kind of just took it to the bank. And with these guys, yeah, it's like it is hard being a producer because, much like a restaurant manager, you're having to pick up so many people's slack. You're having to tell people, no, it's just not right. We got to re-record this, remix it.
Yeah, and, I mean, who knows for sure what stories are true, what stories aren't true. A lot of rumors. So, who really knows what all happened with Suge Knight? But I highly doubt he had anything to do with Tupac's death. I mean, that whole conspiracy theory, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Why would he take out his highest earning, artist?
Right, and get grazed in the head with a bullet when you're riding next to the guy in the car. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, really. I mean, yeah, people say, "Oh, that's the perfect cover up," but I don't buy it. I mean, as far as I've done enough research that I'm comfortable saying I'm pretty sure it was that guy Orlando Anderson who was one of the Crips from Compton. He was at the MGM.
Yeah,
there had been the prior incident somewhere at a California mall where a death row chain had gotten snatched, something or other. And then when the Suge Knight and Tupac saw him at the MGM, they stomped him out. He would have known where they were going probably. And obviously he would have had other guys with him. And I mean, I'm convinced he did it, and he's long dead too. I mean, he got killed himself a couple years later. There was even an interview on tape where, on video, where they were asking him, did he have anything to do with Tupac's death? And he said no, but his body language just gave huge warning signals saying that he was lying. So,
and that's the other thing too. It's just like when you're playing detective, it's like who's giving off the most suspicious vibe. There's plenty of other people who were talking shit about him, and it's like it's just having to separate just again the smack talk from the legit I will do bodily harm to you and probably step out of line if I see at a club, which sucks because you like to think everyone can just coexist amongst each other and, you know, not start something up. But it's not easy having to keep it all apart.
Right. But, you know, it's sad how it all kind of came crashing down, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
And again, to almost kind of like with any of these other celebs that we've seen, just once you pass away, then all everyone wants to do is talk about, oh, how did you die? And everything is like, so you got to remember what they did so well, you know?
right.
And unfortunately, a lot of people like to just magnetize to the bad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there you could go over and over about the, you know, the incident in Las Vegas, how it happened, and
Right. At the end of the day, you're not going to know really any more than you really knew prior. And
right, exactly. I
all we
mean,
can talk about really is just how it just, you know, the LAPD removed a controversial article. And it's just like, that's what I thought that Johnny Depp movie, not to talk about his ass, but just that movie that was just like the speculative fiction. It was like, well, that did more harm than good. You know, it's like JFK with one thing was just talking about endless things that are hard to tell apart. But when you're doing basically just, we don't really know anything, so we're just going to bullshit for about 2 hours. It's like, so you did just as much good as any other speculative forum. And it is a story I do follow, and I still do want to know some answers. And it just seems like it's just so discombobulated. It's like I'm no closer to knowing any more than anyone knew back in when it first broke out. It's just, you know, what happened? Was it a policeman screw up? Was it you know, an assassin sent to destroy him? I still don't know.
well, I think with the Biggie murder, I think it's pretty clear there was some LAPD involved.
Right. And it was just so back to back that you couldn't help but wonder what's going on, you know.
Right. I mean, with Tupac's murder, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's been so many different theories. You know, who knows for certain, but I mean, I think it's just I think it's simpler than the conspiracy theories make it out to be. I think it's just an unfortunate case of, like, you know, the incident with this guy Orlando, and then the basically retaliation, and you know that, and
Mm-hmm.
that was pretty much that, I guess. I mean,
It's literally he's doing all these action crime movies, and literally every day he's living an action movie.
but again, there could be more to the story, you know, than meets the eye. I mean, I thought I remember hearing some rumors that, you know, what was Orlando Anderson doing there at the MGM? You know, did somebody pay him to be there? This and that. Who really knows? I don't know. But like you said, we can talk to you blue in the face, but you're never gonna know the whole story. You know.
You might get a segment of it, and you got to even read carefully who's citing what. You know, is it clickbait, or is it just a requote of an older article resurfacing on Reddit these days? You know, it's just so
Yeah,
hard.
but I am convinced that guy was the shooter.
Because you got video and photo evidence, so it's like, yeah, you got something reviewed there versus, you know, who spotted what, you know, at a witness something at the scene of a crime after the fact. And
There's a lot of mystique around it. Like, I think that's what leads people come up with all these theories,
Totally. And now we're in a day of cameras. So if someone did something screwed up, like a drive-by at a traffic light or in a hotel, there would be a camera to back it up,
One of the prime witnesses was Tupac's friend Yaki Gaddafi, who was part of the Outlaws.
That's right. That was a
He was
big
only,
subgroup.
I think, 19 at the time or something, and then a couple months later, he was found dead in New Jersey,
Yeah.
and supposedly that was all a big accident. I believe it was like a cousin of another member of the Outlaws had claimed he accidentally shot him or something like that. So I don't know, but I mean, it was a sad situation, and I don't really think it had anything to do with him being a witness. I think it was a coincidence, but
it's a good question to ask because
there's always going to be that mystique underlying the whole death of Tupac, because it's like it just becomes this, it's like this, like a, larger than life persona that, now you got this crazy shooting and right in Las Vegas, and the whole East Coast, West Coast beef and this and that. I mean, there's a lot of elements that can play into it.
I remember Puff Daddy was a suspect for a while, and I was just like, yeah, I don't see it. I really don't. I see him as no different than any of these guys where they are trying to make it big, and occasionally they are around other guys who, this is before we could get our phones out and, capture, an infamous feud in public at a restaurant or what have you. And it's like, hey, he was dating J-Lo, making her career bigger, and hanging out with Biggie. And it's just like, I think Biggie was no different than Tupac. He really just wanted to, get all the street cred, and he had it. He had the lyrics, he had the proper producers making him big, and then he had, again, just the persona that people warmed up to. So it's like, yeah, I don't. If Puff had done something like that, I think something really would have slipped. He would have, and giving what a reawakened and religious type he can be at times, I'm like, I don't see it. I don't think he could live with himself if he were behind something like that. So, but what do I know?
Yeah, I don't really think he did have anything to do with it. I mean,
I think he's just making his business, and he's outspoken, and everyone instantly was like, "Oh, you're talking smack. You must be a suspect." I'm like, nah, I don't. I just don't see it.
I know there were some rumors and this and that, but
and what would he gain? Is like, again, is like, part of it is you want the feud to keep going. So yeah, I don't think anyone wanted to do any of that. And I mean, Snoop Dogg was friends with both the Biggie and Tupac, and it's like, in a way, is like, with what he's blabbed about, how Shuj could be out of whack sometimes. It's like, yeah, I think the only person to fear was just, like you say, maybe just other people who had Tupac had, pissed off from the get-go. And so I wouldn't be surprised if even just other people from the East Coast wanted to, raise hell up in the West to let them know, hey, if we didn't forget about all the shit you talked to us, we needed some jail time there, But this, again, this is where it gets dangerous, because it is speculative, and it just stinks that a lot of people who may have known tons about it, are either dead, afraid to speak, or, again, like you say, just after all the politics and the LAPD asking people to back off on the report, it's like, who do I believe now? It's just so convoluted.
You made a good point. You got to be really, really careful, and you want to have your facts straight, because that is a dangerous game. And there was I believe it was in the documentary called Welcome to Death Row.
That might have been the one I saw, where you're hearing his audio from his jail cell as he's being interviewed, and it's just so spooky.
This one had, somebody was interviewed on there, and they said that during the whole East Coast, West Coast beef, Biggie had supposedly gone on the radio. It was when the Dog Pound and Snoop Dogg had a song called New York, New York. You know, it was like,
I love the Dog Pound, Corrupt, and Nate. Those guys are awesome.
yeah, Corrupt. I mean, I think one of Corrupt's bodyguards ended up getting killed because
Really?
I think that was this incident where they had fired shots into the trailer or something, because it was either from this incident or from, I know Corrupt has a song called Calling Out Shots. It came out a few years later where it was like he was like dissing everybody like on the East Coast, Ja Rule, DMX, a whole bunch of people. So I can't remember for sure which incident caused this, somebody that had fired shots into his trailer or something. And I think somebody ended up dead, but from that documentary, they said that Biggie had gone on the air and said, you know, hey, New York, why are you allowing Tupac and the Dog Pound to shoot this video here, disrespecting our city and this and that, right?
Oh my God.
But it wasn't Tupac at all. It was Snoop Dogg, you know. Tupac wasn't involved in that song at all. So I don't know if he just had his info wrong or what, but
Wow. And plus, there's this thing called money, guys. You can rent out anything.
well, right. I mean, unfortunately, I think, you know, that beef, it does kind of
Just
you get the
escalated
media
even more.
hype. You get that media hype behind it. The media loves to fan the flames, and then it probably does sell more records. But
Then you
when
can't
people
take
start
it back. You can't just
killed
say,
over it,
I apologize.
yeah, when people start getting killed over it, then obviously it's gone way too far.
Yeah. And once you say it, you know, you can't unprint it. And I mean, you can take down as many of them as you can, but, you know, if you pissed off someone, you pissed off someone. So it's like you say, it's just, this was just kind of showing how anyone could be exploited. You know, we were, by the 90s, you know, we were embracing all kinds of things, you know, edgy programming after 10 o'clock, you know, network versus pay channels, and, you know, tasteless, you know, talk shows and reality, you know. So, and, you know, OJ Simpson trial, and it's like people would watch anything for hours on end, talk about it at work, and embracing different types of technology. And so, yeah, it just got to where it was just like, man, it's just anyone can be taken advantage of. We're embracing the technology too fast.
Yeah, I mean, it is, things have definitely changed a lot. I mean, I hear like people playing like contemporary rap music, and it just doesn't sound the same at all. To me, it sounds
Yeah,
sounds terrible, but
I'm in Dallas, and I try to be supportive of any, you know, music artists as I can, but there are many people who I will see trying to be, you know, hip hop or even pop, and it's, you know, sometimes electronic, and unfortunately, you know, since anyone can make the tools, it's just so hard to stand out. It really is, and there will be plenty of times where it's like, hey, I'll give your video a thumbs up, but, you know,
the thing that really the one of the number one things I think that set people like Tupac apart from the crowd is that you could feel they had a passion behind them, you know?
He raised the bar so much and loved what he did. He embraced the fame and fortune, and at the same time, you know, it's just,
you know,
who could have braced for that? You know,
if you got a passion behind what you're speaking, you know, you're gonna really reach people. You know, they'll be able to feel what you're saying. You know, as opposed to all these young guys who are just probably doing it for the money or whatever. And you know what I mean? Like I hear some of the stuff, and it's just like everybody sounds the same. There's no passion. Yeah, there's no passion behind hardly any of it. Yeah. I can't tell any of these guys apart. They're all using auto-tune.
They're using the same exact producer.
Maybe I'm just getting old, but no, hip
that's
hop
definitely how
today
it is
can't.
with pop.
Hip hop today can't fuck with the '90s hip hop.
No. Well, and totally. And then you're seeing people who, also, they got all these stories to tell. And so, like, when he's sampling stuff, it is actually kind of just getting everyone in the mood. And I think that's what works so well about those songs. And he's definitely one of many artists who I have various songs from his, living era versus, afterlife. And it is just a good way to sometimes just kind of lie down and just listen to some great beats, and just seeing how he's just an altogether intriguing persona. And again, I'm not surprised at the kind of people he would hang out with that would also be shady. And I mean, he was born to be just kind of, he had to prove something. You got divorced parents, and you got, who were both Black Panther members, and you want to be a poet, you've got a vision, a voice that you want to share, and you want everyone to hear it. You don't care if they don't want to hear it. You got to say it. It's eating you up, and you just get so much from his persona as you do his material, as you do just, again, any interview and any acting performance. Like, any filmmaker who's worked with him has often said, he kind of, it was interesting. You'd see shades of his persona both on screen and off, but he could be chill one minute versus, trying to get pussy the next. And it was just so interesting how, I remember there was a great interview in Vibe I read years ago, and, it had people who had worked with him on Gridlocked, and he's trying to flirt with Lucy Liu, and she's not interested. He's trying to learn martial arts, and she's.
I didn't even remember that she was in that film.
Yeah, it was like she and Bokeem Woodbine are both very brief moments in it, and not credited for whatever reason. But
really? I remember Tandy Newton was in it.
Tandy Newton, yes, and Tim Roth got along really well with him. Really liked his essence and humor. I remember he said, and Bonnie Curtis Hall, who's one of the henchmen and the director and co-writer.
He was in Broken Arrow, the John Woo film. Yeah.
Yep. Die Hard 2. He and his wife Casey Lemons are both actor turned directors these days. And
she's married to Vondi.
Yeah.
Okay, because she was in Hard Target.
Correct.
Another John Woo film. See, we can bring John Woo into any conversation.
John Woo, and remembered he directed Waist Deep, and she has a part as one of the gals at the bank. So, yeah, it did.
Oh, Vondi, yeah, he directed that. Okay, yep.
There you go.
I saw that. Wasn't that the one with the game in it? And
yeah, the game and Tyrese. And
yeah. I saw that a long time ago. Yeah,
it's still a fun movie, but. So there you go. They had their experience of working with all these different hip hop moguls, and it's interesting how. But yeah, he was just mainly just citing how Tupac, he had this over the top persona, but he always came prepared. He was still a professional, and so it's like that's kind of the interesting thing. It's just he knew what lines he was going to say, and I'm sure they kept plenty of ad libs in if there were any. There's bound to be some on Juice, and. It's just interesting how he could do all this stuff. He had this unending energy, he has this strong faith. He has this strong voice, and is going to all these midnight parties after wrapping up a record or shooting a movie, and you're like, man, when does he find time to sleep? Does he ever sleep? Does he catch a cat nap? Because he just seems he's a one of a kind, unstoppable kind of force until he was stopped, and it's just like, man, people don't appreciate that kind of talent and just cool human being. And yeah, I'm not surprised that he's got some shady, marks on his record, like a sexual assault. I'm not surprised. He got carried away at times. And it's also just interesting just seeing how so many people in the rap game from that point on is like, I want to be the next Tupac. I'm like, well, you got a long way to go. Because
there won't be another one, so you might as well stop trying.
That's a big bar. And to even
I get it. Like Bruce Lee had all those impersonators, and then Tupac. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of people who tried to emulate his style, the way he looked, the way he dressed, the bandana tied around the head, being bald, and you know what I mean. Like Ja Rule kind of came under fire for kind of trying to copy Tupac's style a little bit. And
I do vaguely recall that, and see, he was more, he was part of the hip hop game, but he was mixing in R&B lyrics. So it's just so wild how everybody got compared, and you didn't know how much of it was just bigoted sounding marketing or just people legit saying, I want to be on his level of fame and have a similar style and lyrics. You don't know unless you pick it all apart. And like you say,
everybody's going to be influenced, but it's probably best to just be yourself.
Right. Enjoy who you are, what you do.
That's my assumption. I'm not a music artist. I'm not a music producer, so I can't tell you from any kind of business perspective or anything like that. But
that's a good point, because there does come a time where you just have to say, hey, whatever you want to be, just go for it. Don't let anyone stop you. And at the same time, you're going to have your critics. You're going to have to find I kind of miss the times where people could also, this is where you could find a way to be vocal, and that was part of being cool. And it was also kind of where I just kind of wished, whenever I see a celebrity asked a loaded question, I always respect someone if they can be very clever in their retort. And that kind of is just gone now, because half the time, like you say, the media won't print the full interview. We'll just go for like the sizzle,
Yeah.
And you just kind of wish people could be more clever without overdoing.
Well, yeah, another thing that's interesting, like you were talking about all the material he recorded and this and that, and then they kept putting out all the albums after he died. But a lot of that stuff was like changed around from what I understand. Like I guess some of those tracks he had like had them produced by somebody else. And then when they finally put them out on like one of the posthumous albums, and I guess they had like a different beat some of the time. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to really go through and look at.
There's some that's Phil doctored when I was listening through a bunch of them a year ago. And overall, I mean, it's interesting how he got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017 by Snoop Dogg, because he's not a rock star, but he lives definitely a rock star kind of life, definitely.
Yeah, I think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I mean, I think they've just incorporated hip hop into it, you know what I mean?
Okay, I mean, gotcha.
I mean, I think NWA got in there.
Okay, cool.
I'm trying to remember if maybe Chuck D, Public Enemy. I'm not positive about them, but I think there was a few other rap artists that got inducted in there.
Unless you're in the studio, you have an inside man, you never really know. So, yeah. you can slap a name on anything and it exists. And I'm just glad that we have this kind of bigger, larger than life talent, because it also just shows just like
That's my son here.
he loves Tupac. Nice.
He's trying to talk about Tupac, but he doesn't know what to say.
Oh man. Well, yeah. Oh, that's some fighting words. More of a Biggie fan. Oh.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, it's obviously it's a different time period nowadays. Like, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and, you know, I mean, I don't really know. It's funny, like, thinking, like, okay, when I was like 7 and 8, you know, I was checking out some of this stuff back in the day, and then, like,
it was easier to sneak around and not be told, what to or not to listen to, because even if people didn't want you to listen, or your folks didn't want you to listen to anything, you were going to hear some kind of over the top song while shopping at a mall or a grocery store.
Yeah, and especially with an older sibling, you know what I mean. But I mean, if you take away all the and obviously some of the material's not suitable for really young kids, because you, like, thinking back, it's like, okay, let kids be kids, because everybody's in a rush now, for kids to be grown up and this and that. But I mean, there's a lot of important messages in the music that that kids could definitely learn something from. But I
Right.
I would be very careful what until they reach a certain age of maturity, not necessarily a certain age, but level of maturity. Like.
And to survive the 90s, back when politicians like especially Dan Quayle, who hated Soldier Story, and just I'm so glad that I was able to see this from a faraway persona, because I was almost buying into bullshit like, oh, video games inspire real life violence, and it's like, no, stupid people are responsible for everything.
Exactly. And I remember,
don't blame the artist, blame the parent who should have looked at the explicit rating.
There was some quote from Dan Quayle it was on Tupac's second album, and yeah, he was talking about some of the material from the first album. And
any attention's good attention.
Well, yeah, but he was saying, like, there is absolutely no reason for a record like this to be published. Well, what about the freedom of speech?
Right.
You know what I mean? So
not acknowledging it, and then
why shouldn't the record be published?
Right. Didn't break any rules. Is like, okay. If we can show cops beating up a bunch of gangbangers on TV, I think it's okay for a gangbanger to talk about. I mean, that's the same deal with Ice-T's cop killer. He was talking about a scenario where some random hoodlum decided, I'm gonna get revenge on some cops who gunned down my friend. And again, he said in like this one 2006 like rap documentary, is like, half the time you got to just keep growing a thick skin, because people are going to listen to your stuff but not really actually listen to it. They just, if they think it just sounds ugly or whatever, it's like, without actually listening to it, they're gonna just shun you. And
right.
It's such a shame that Warner Brothers had to cave into pressure like that, and he pretty much only was getting some gigs just doing live shows and movies. And I'm just so glad that, I mean, and I just, for Ice-T, it was just so funny how he and Richard Belzer, same kind of thing. Belzer was joking about, JFK conspiracies, and I think that made some people uncomfortable. So then they're on this hit TV show, kind of getting to do a little bit of what they kind of already do, which is play these larger than life personas. And I think Tupac definitely got some of that same aura. Any negative or positive remarks worked in his favor, in that he could basically just, he could sell out a show overnight. He could, any nightclub he was at, everyone wanted to be at and see, him maybe perform or just hang out with them and ask to, for him to pitch one of their jams or if they could rap with him,
I think Eazy-E had said a long time ago, like, any publicity is good publicity, So,
Yep.
like, fuck the police, I mean, like the NWA, they didn't just come up with that track out of nowhere. I mean, there's a reason behind it. I mean, it's not to say all cops are bad or all cops are.
Exactly. They're just feeling oppressed by some cops who kind of profiled them. It's like, that's what it's getting at.
There's enough of it going on. I mean, to the extent where, and obviously it's still going on today, 30 years later, more than 30 years later, where, I mean, the song is very much still relevant today.
And nothing has really changed, so it's going to keep getting played.
Right. I mean, Tupac definitely, like Soldier Story, that song. I mean, that's a great track. I remember he's talking about getting pulled over. They finally pulled me over and I laughed. Remember Rodney King and a blast on their punk ass, something like that. And I mean, you got to look at it. You got to read in between the lines. Yeah, it's not. You don't want to say, hey, go wild and crazy, and
it should be the Wild West.
Right. But you got to say, hey, if some police officer is overstepping their or abusing their power, then a citizen should have the right to defend themselves. Not go crazy and just, cops are humans too, right? But that's the thing. We're all equal. Like, cops aren't above the law, and they shouldn't be treated any differently than a citizen. So I mean, we're all human beings. So, but the fact is, the cops have a job, so theoretically they should be more well trained to handle if a situation goes south, right? I'm not saying if somebody's firing a gun at them that they shouldn't shoot the guy, but all of this killing unarmed people, I mean,
issue a warning and don't issue it at the same time that you're unloading your Glock, like freeze.
Right. I mean, there's obviously, I mean, who knows how many, there's obviously a lot of problems in the whole.
Well, it just sucked that a lot of it was happening in supposedly progressive, states like, California and New York. And you just like to think that not everyone, and when they're asked to follow policies, you like to think that it's not going to be just because, we got to cave into political pressure. It's like, no, really, this is a problem that a lot of people are feeling, prejudiced by. And
what's interesting, is the whole ordeal when Tupac shot those two cops down in Atlanta. He got off on it. I mean, it was like Halloween or something, and I guess they were off duty. They were drunk. I believe they were harassing some guy. Probably because they were racist.
And these are questions that are hard to ask. If a cop shoots another cop, are they just as much a gangbanger, or is that an abuse of power? And when in this case, when it's like cops are off duty and civilians defending himself and getting into a squat with him, it's like, where do you draw the line? And it's just so hard to explain to people because we're unfortunately still have a black and white society where many will just feel like there's one way or the other. Murder is still murder. And it's like, yeah, but there's so many degrees to problem.
I think people too, they get, if you take the bias out that so many people have that, unfortunately, right? Like certain people have that bias because, hey, I don't live inside their body. I don't feel what they feel, but to me, I sense that they're racist. And because it's like, I know people who always, they'll always defend the cop, no matter what the problem is, no matter what the case is. And if it's a black man dead on the other side of the gun, he's always basically he deserved it for one reason or another. You know what I mean?
You'll see that. You'll see other stereotypes like who do I commonly see in the wrong place at the wrong time? And it's like, yeah, you can't even think that way, buddy. There's so many people who live in bad neighborhoods or are trying to get to a better place, and places that are destined to fail. How many? Everyone has a place in their state where they're like, oh, that's a bad side of town with crappy apartments or broken down cars. I'm not going there. Regardless of who's there.
I think back in the 90s, a lot of that gangster rap from those days. I mean, yeah, I'd be lying if I said none of it glamorized the lifestyle. Obviously, a lot of it did, but a lot of it also, painted this picture of like the harsh reality, and it didn't
the line begins to blur. I mean, it's really no different than if you were to go hang out with some friends in Alabama and one of them had, an uncle who was a hillbilly or had illegal weapons there. So it's like it is like you say, it's just hard to talk about some of this still today because it's kind of like a puncture wound. Once it's been fractured, no one wants to stitch it up. No one wants to even figure out what caused it. Everyone kind of just wants a violent reaction. And it's such a shame how we, like you say, is like we'll talk about certain things and it's like no one can seem to read between the lines. It's like there's going to be people who know people who were shady or who were capable of doing bad things but didn't do it in front of their person. It's really no different than if you're to encounter someone who was from an abusive home or knew their father was capable of kicking their ass to where, they had to call the cops or escort them in an ambulance. And when you're surrounded by gangland figures, yeah, you're going to talk about gangland figures. And you can see where, is like, this is really no different than if you have a celebrity who did shady stuff prior, before, or after. And if you made it part of your life, again, if that's how you lived your life, you're going to talk about it. You're going to sing about it. And so, yes, it can go either way. People who are in that life who relate to that are going to buy your album. People who just love the genre are going to buy your album and can keep reality and fiction apart. It's just really hard to, like you say, just talk about this because so many people just want one way or the other. There is no in between. There is no blur.
Yeah. I mean, and for a lot of those artists, it was a form of storytelling. Like E40 said in one of his albums, if I was really out there doing all this shit that I'm talking about, I'd either be dead or in jail. So, most of the stuff is stuff I've either seen or heard other people talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, once you make it, like Master P, look at Master P, he's got all this new stuff nowadays. Like he's selling like these snacks and stuff in the grocery stores, and like he's a legit he's built this like business empire. We'll talk more about him on the No Limit one, but
oh yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like
everyone finds a hustle, and sometimes it's kind of like all these other celebrities when they're doing something they really aren't interested in doing. It's like, well, it's where the ball fell, and that's where they're going to pick it up, and they're going to keep doing this or that. And there's an audience for everyone, and there's plenty of them who, even if they haven't had a hit in a while, like you say, it's a lot of money and a great return if you can be a mascot, if you can do. We see people critiquing actors who are in, famous, Bank of America type commercials. It's like, yeah, they did that. The check cleared and it's an easy gig and they're going to do that in addition to their larger than life persona and their has-been career. And I can't think of any actor who hasn't invested in, say, like a wine company. And so why wouldn't it make sense to see, like you say, a rapper appear in an insurance or food line commercial?
Yeah, I remember 50 Cent for a while. He was into like the vitamin water. I think he was behind like some kind of a vitamin water company.
I didn't know about like that. That's wild.
It was quite a while back, and then he was even, obviously for a long time, he was he's still obviously doing films, but he actually used to come here to Grand Rapids a lot, like
Oh
back
wow.
maybe like in 2009. Well, shortly after I moved out here, you'd always hear about him being in town filming a movie. They used to film a lot of movies. So he filmed a few movies here in town, and he, I guess, he was like friends with Floyd Mayweather and stuff. So
There you go. He talks about basically every day is like a boxing. He's like, that's exactly it. He's going to a boxing ring, so he's
I
singing about.
never, I never saw him, but I've heard people say that they saw him downtown with Floyd Mayweather, and that I think he took Bruce Willis out to this famous steakhouse called the Chop House
I
downtown.
believe it. They were working for the same producer, Randall Emmett and George Furla, for Emmett Furla films, and they were best known for doing movies like Street Kings and The Irishman and Lone Survivor, and in between, produce about 5
Yeah,
different,
I think it was
video
a
on
film
demand.
called like Gun or something like that.
Oh, that was Val Kilmer.
Okay, Val Kilmer was 50
But yeah,
Cent in that
Bruce
one.
and him were in this movie called The Prince,
Okay,
and
that
they
must have been
set
that
up.
one.
So there you go. Yeah, they must have been a scene together and said, "Hey, let's grab a bite at this steakhouse I know."
Yeah, I mean they would. There was a few films that I don't even think I saw any of those films, but they had like used Grand Rapids to double as Detroit or something, and
There you go. Filming
but
locations,
anyway,
man.
no, I mean I think if Tupac had lived, I mean I think like
And much like with Brandon Lee, is like he'd still be. He probably. I would not be surprised if Tupac, had he lived on, might have. Obviously he's going to dominate the Grammy shows. I guarantee you. It's just a hunch, but I think he would have won an Oscar for like best composed song or whatever. I think
that's very possible. Yeah,
I
I think
think
he.
there would have been an overwhelmingly high vote to where the Academy probably couldn't have had avoided or ignored the public's cry.
No, I think if Tupac had lived, this is this is just my own feeling. Like I feel like he might have even gone into politics or something.
That would have been interesting too. I would not have been surprised had he appeared at like a WWE, event, and
Oh, but I could even
mockingly
see him. I
fought.
know. I mean, to some people, it probably sounds crazy, right? But think about it. I mean, it was a smart man. Like I could see him like being like president, even. You know what I mean? Like later in life. You know.
I think so, because it seemed like he just carried this just giant amount of power. People just loved everything he had to say, even if they didn't agree with it. It just I could definitely see him picking up just crazy Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, or even Donald Trump type numbers, just crazy, just like,
Oh boy.
well, and I mean that in just like in
Right.
terms of just figuratively, is like people, if they just are drawn to your persona, they are just going to follow you into Dante's Inferno. They're just going to do that.
Yeah. I
So
mean, you got a
I'm with
point.
you.
I mean, he had a ton of charisma.
He had a ton of charisma. He just always had these highly rated, daytime and MTV network, interviews. He had that vibe. And so it's just, and of course, again, the best filmmakers saw his persona and try to utilize it. And you're like, yeah, I got to use this on screen. He's just got that aura. I can't remember, but I could have sworn Antoine Fuqua wanted to work with him on a movie, Training Day, Equalizer director. So
That's very possible. I know that Antoine Fuqua he directed the Gangsta's Paradise music video.
right, that's as close as he got with Coolio and getting Dr.
I'm not
Dre in
sure if
Training
he
Day.
did any other music videos or if he obviously
I think he
did
did, but they took a while to list him on his IMDb or for whatever reason.
Replacement Killers with Chow Yun Fat. I mean, there we go. John Woo is a producer or executive producer. I mean,
yeah,
like that's
going back to your John Woo connection. Maybe
that's
John Woo would have utilized.
That's a pretty cool Hollywood take on like a John Woo film.
Yeah, I do love that movie, and I think yeah, I think Tupac would have definitely been utilized in a Fuqua or a John Woo production eventually. He might have,
Yeah.
had
Imagine
he
him in
been
like
in the 90s longer. Because, yeah, it's
Tupac
like,
and Chow Yun Fat,
I would have paid to see it. They could be two thieves or cops working together. It would have
cops.
been
Yeah,
awesome.
exactly. Like in the
Vice
Corruptor.
cops blurring the
Imagine if
line.
imagine if Tupac had been in the Corruptor instead of Mark Wahlberg.
Oh,
I mean, that's kind of an interesting thought.
boing, boing, boing. That would have been great.
But no, I mean, who is he? Jimmy Iovine, right? With Interscope. I think
I think so. I don't know the name per se, but I think there was a Jimmy somebody.
Well, yeah, he worked with Dre a lot. I mean, Interscope had like distributed the Chronic for Dre, and then
yeah, Dre would have definitely picked his brain and said, "Hey, man, Tupac, man, I got you. Can you be on one of my albums?"
well, another interesting thing, and for the record, I'm not trying to, because I wasn't there. I don't know everything that Suge Knight was doing or wasn't doing, but just my gut feeling, and this is just human behavior, right? Like when Dre left Death Row, then Tupac started dissing Dre, and I feel a lot of that. Probably, I mean, I would assume that Suge Knight would feel hurt about it because Dre was like his number one producer, and I mean he freaking started Death Row with Dre, and then there was like this businessman, well, like this businessman. He's out of prison now. His name is Harry O. That's like his street name.
I do recall Harry O
I
vaguely.
I think he like helped fund Death Row Records, but I think he wanted to remain anonymous.
Right. He knew it wasn't going to last too long, and that, if there was any other legal affairs, he didn't want to have to pay out the ass, to cover all the court fees and whatever was owed.
But my gut feeling is that maybe Suge Knight felt disrespected or something by Dre leaving the company, and maybe he got in Tupac's ear and said, "Hey, why don't you diss him on the record or something like that?" Who knows?
It is even more bizarre how Tupac, gets attacked, in Suge's, like sedan, I think it said. It's just like, Jesus. It's just like, to add in extra insult to injury, your MVP rapper and your car property screwed up, and
Yeah, and then he went to prison too right around that time. I think he violated parole by because he was shown on the camera that kicking the guy Orlando Anderson. But I mean, again, Suge Knight, regardless of what anybody thinks of him, he definitely deserves his credit in history for the music empire he did help.
There are
build.
shitty people
And
who are very talented.
that shit was definitely like number one in the rap game for quite a few years, I would say. But once Dre left, that really started the downfall. Then Tupac got killed. Then Snoop Dogg left. He went to No Limit. And by then it's like, I know Suge Knight put out a compilation called like Chronic 2000, and he had a couple of artists that were obvious copycats. One was named Top Dog, and he was definitely a Snoop Dogg biter. And then there was somebody, I think his name was The Realist, and he was like a Tupac wannabe,
Wow.
I think Dre originally wanted to name his second album Chronic 2000, but I think because Suge Knight had put that out, he didn't have the rights or something. And that's why he called it 2001. So
everyone was being mindful at the end of the millennium, and you're just like, just slow down, guys. Let's get through this first.
Oh, another thing I gotta mention it because it came to mind. Unfortunately, this woman just passed away a couple weeks ago. Her name was Jewel. She was an artist. She had been on Death Row Records, a singer. And I remember in that documentary, she said that she had heard a rumor that when, Suge Knight, I guess, had visited Tupac when he was in prison, it was in upstate New York, off of that sexual assault charge. And she said she had heard that Tupac had signed the contract to be on Death Row Records on like a piece of toilet paper or something.
I would not doubt it. He definitely pledged his soul. He's like, it's my only option out. Here's what I got to do. And
yeah, but I mean, that was a smart move on Suge Knight's part because, like, Death Row was already like, you had Dre and Snoop, and then
it literally means just that people who could get the Death Row, confirmation if they.
Yeah, having Tupac on them, just even though it was briefly, but that really just cemented that label, like, in music history or pop culture history, however you want to call it, right? But you see Death Row Records T-shirts sold at places that, like, you wouldn't think of. I know people who, one of my friends said, "Oh, I'm not even really a rap fan at all," but he like bought a Death Row Records T-shirt for one reason or another. Ironically, I'm wearing one right now, even though I didn't even do it on purpose, like because of the interview.
It's second nature, man.
It's just second nature,
Yeah, it's
but
awesome.
yeah, the music out of that company is just like, it's just so classic, It just has a certain vibe that can't be replicated again.
How could it be? Oh, what would anyone do differently?
My only hope, Snoop Dogg just bought Death Row Records right around the time of the Super Bowl.
Oh, really?
But I heard that he was like planning on making it an NFT label. And I understand that's the popular thing to do nowadays, business-wise, but I still buy CDs. I want a physical copy. I want a CD. I can't really get with the digital age of music. Like,
I do like playing an album in my car, just hearing the surround sound and what have you.
Yeah, I like the physical, like I like the collection of it, put my CDs on the shelf and pull one out and throw it in the player.
Mm-hmm.
Read through the little booklet inside and I don't know. That's just, I guess it's that's the time we kind of grew up in. That's the main way you could find these albums, is to go out of the store and buy them before the internet kind of took over. So
yeah, I do, before they became collector's items.
I saw like a vinyl of All Eyes on Me at the record store here a few years ago, and it was like going for way more money than the CD, which I understand. I know like vinyls have become more of like a popular kind of throwback. People want to collect them and stuff. So
You're right.
I never went down the vinyl path, but CDs, like, I gotta have an album on CD if they put it out on CD.
Right. It's only fair.
Even though my wife wants to throw them all out because they're taking up too much space. That and all my Blu-rays and DVDs.
Doesn't everybody have some kind of additional backup plan or CD or medium? Oh, man. So thank you for joining us on this show. This was really a delight.
Yeah, I know, to talk about Tupac in just an hour and a half. There's so much to say. Obviously this isn't scripted, so we didn't like write down notes or anything.
We gotta talk from the heart.
So just kind of talking about whatever comes to mind, and I mean,
by all means.
You could do 20 episodes on them, and you'd still have things to say. So, well, I'll say real quick, All Eyes on Me. That was definitely my favorite album. I don't think it was his most personal album, but like production wise, I mean, that album. And again, that's the first one I sat down and like listened to the full album. So, cool. Usually it's like that first impression hits you the hardest, but
that's a lot of impressions to leave,
Yeah. After that one, I would probably say Me Against the World.
Because that's literally his whole life summed up. Is like, God, I'm me against the world. All times, everywhere. Dear Mama and So Many Tears. I mean, that album has a lot of great tracks. And it's mostly just him. There's only a few like guest artists on that one. Of course, All Eyes on Me, I think he tried to fit everybody that was still on death row on the album that he could. Oh, wow. Gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah. Well, all right, man. Thank you ever so much. This was very eye-opening and a very cool sit down. You be safe out there.
We'll return after these messages.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
We let things pile up in the DVR, we add them to our queues, we wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters Podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.
Cool thing about Blind Knowledge is we are in multiple countries. We are worldwide all across the globe. We are in the US, we are in the UK, we are in Canada, Germany, India, Japan. We're in Australia, y'all. BlindKnowledge.com. Now back to the feature presentation.
Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, all things that we love, all manga that were originally published in the legendary magazine Weekly Shonen Jump.
But not every series can run for 300 chapters and have a hit anime. This is David.
This is Jordan.
We're the hosts of Shonen Flop. Each episode we look at manga that ran in Jump that didn't quite make it.
We discuss what it did wrong, what it did right, how the series could have turned itself around, and ultimately, was it a flop or not?
We're on all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find us at shonenflop.com.
Keep on flopping, floppers.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked